So what I'm going to do is go through a brief presentation. I'm going to talk about the priorities and the guidelines at kind of a general level. It won't be necessarily how to do the application, but I'll do a couple of, heads up of issues that would have your application not be considered, so you know that up front. And then show you the web page and a little bit about the login. Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with questions. And I am going to share screen now. There we go. There we go. First thing to know is it is competitive. I'm planning on about $350,000 in funding for this. I'm going to put a warning in here. Those of you who watch political news, and Congress has not passed a budget for 24. That's the federal fiscal year 24, which is next state and local fiscal year 25. So what that means is I do not have a funding letter for next year yet. I don't know what my funding level will be. So if there are issues that would change our plans for the grants, we will let everyone know as soon as possible. I'm expecting to get a similar level of funding that I have this year, which would mean I could put about $350,000 to the grant program. But as my second bullet point here says, the grants are only going to be available if the Institute of Museum and Library Service is actually given an appropriation and is able to allot funds. Part of the issue there is we do have funds for this year. We have a little bit left over, but we are not allowed to encumber across fiscal years. So we will do something else with that remaining funds from this year, and we're crossing our fingers about how much money we get for next year. We would really like more, but I don't think that's likely out of Congress right now. So my second thing for you guys is to tell you to read the grant documentation thoroughly. I realize at this point I'm a technical writer. It's not super exciting, but there's not a whole lot of fluff in there. So read through it. If you have any questions, if I've used grant language that isn't your typical jargon, feel free to call me up and we can talk through it. But I am recommending you really thoroughly read that application packet. There is a literacy and digital inclusion one, and there is a local history digitization one. The issues around digitization standards are different enough that there's essentially two applications. The basic parts of the application are the same: who you are, what your library is, etc., how this is going to impact an audience. But then the details about how you're going to manage a project are a little bit different between literacy and digital inclusion and local history. So depending on what you're interested in, I may be telling you to read both of those. I hope not. But they are separate application packets and they are actual separate applications online. If you're concerned about managing your grant, if you are approved, the grant administration manual for approved grantees is already posted. So you can flip through that and see what the expectations will be from me. And the grant program timeline is also posted. One thing to look at in the timeline is you can't start grant activities until the grant contract starts, which is October 1st. And you will have to finish anything that you're spending money on by the end of August, and then you can finish the grant by the activities in whole by the end of September. So there is some additional documentation to be aware of that's at the bottom of the page. One of the things that you're going to be required to do is credit the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Library of Michigan. So there's a handout on that. You are required to do some level of evaluation regardless of what type of project you do. IMLS prefers outcome-based, meaning did your project have an impact on your audience? Did they learn to do something? Did they apply for jobs more? Did the kids read better? That sort of thing. So take a look at that. You can apply for indirect costs, and we have both academic and public libraries on this call. If you are an academic library, we will take a current indirect cost rate negotiated with another federal agency. IMLS does not directly do indirect cost rates. If you're a public library, it's unlikely you have an indirect cost rate, but you might. If you are in that boat, you're allowed to take a 10% de minimis rate, and that is not over and above the grant total. It's part of your grant total, but it's 10% of everything except equipment. So that's essentially the federal government saying, we know it costs you money to manage a grant, and you can't document all of that and say, well, this much of the electric bill went to grant activities. So it's essentially not a free 10%, but it's a 10% you don't have to document. There is a statistics guide if you get a grant in your final report, there's certain statistics you're going to have to give me, because I am going to have to type it into my report to IMLS about what you did. So that's something to be aware of as you write a grant proposal, that there are some things you're going to need to keep track of. I don't think they're too onerous, but hopefully that's what you think as well. There is a reimbursement request checklist of errors that I have to go back and forth with grantees. The vast majority are reimbursement requests, and I will go back and forth with you until I have a complete reimbursement request. So do take some time to review the reimbursement materials if you are allotted a grant. And there are some required evaluation questions. So that's another thing to be aware of as you're writing your evaluation section of your proposal. So first things first, to be eligible for this grant, you need to be a public library. You need to be currently eligible for state aid and legally established. There are a handful of community libraries that don't fit that guidelines. If you're concerned about that, feel free to reach out to me directly. Academic libraries are eligible if they are public or nonprofit and currently accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. Did I say that right? I don't have my notes in front of me. And library cooperatives are also eligible. You must be eligible at the time of application and at the time of contracting. So the eligibility does mean that you have to meet this criteria. You have one or more paid library staff. You have a regular schedule of library services. You have a dedicated facility. You have a budget. You have a record of multi-type library cooperation. This means things like interlibrary loan between libraries. Oh, yes, I did it right. Higher Learning Commission. So the priorities we have for this grant, these are the same that we have done in the past couple of years. They have worked well for us in terms of the type of requests we're getting. And our focus is more on the area of the priority and not on specific programs. We don't like to say, we want you to do a family space program, or we want you to do a hotspot lending program. Your communities are different. They're different sizes. Some are rural, some are urban. What we want to say is these are overarching themes that we're interested in. And then as those fit your community, you can come up with the specifics. So we're interested in literacy. We're interested in local history and special collections. And we're interested in digital inclusions. And I have a typo on the bottom line. It says proposals must focus on one of these three areas is what it should say. So if what you're thinking of, you can't see it in one of those three areas, give me a call. We can talk about it. Perhaps we can look at a different aspect if your idea doesn't fit these. Ongoing capacity will be considered. You don't need to start from scratch. However, if you are already doing something, the proposal will need to be a significant increase or outreach. It can't be to maintain the current level. So literacy, there's a lot of things that fall under this, and we're interested in a range. Early literacy is one of the typical things people think of with public libraries. Financial literacy did get mentioned. I think Stephanie, you mentioned that. Digital literacy, media literacy. The difference between digital and media literacy is a good question. We're interested in ESL, adult literacy, health. I spoke to an academic librarian about teaching students about how to use AI ethically and successfully. we would consider that a literacy issue. So we've got a broad scope to this. If you thought, well, there's a literacy thing, but we don't really want to do something with children, you can do literacy in a variety of ways and have it be a successful proposal with us. So some examples that we have here, doing ESL programming. We've had libraries in the past do significant work with migrant farm workers. We've had people do immigrant groups, media literacy programming for students. I think that's, with the way technology is going, that's going to be just the perennial topic for libraries. In financial and digital literacy training for underserved groups are also important. Any questions on the literacy priority? Anybody want to jump in? I see I have a chat message. Okay. Absolutely, Jacqueline. Jay, you want to jump in?
No. Yeah, can I come off mute and ask?
Oh, please do.
Okay. I was curious about, let's say there's multiple libraries, like a university library, and then a local library system in the same geographic area that that apply for different projects. Does does your organization take that into account to kind of spread the award across the state, or does that not necessarily play a huge role? Like, would you guys never award two different libraries within the same geographic region in that year, or how does that work?
No, it might be a consideration if we have grants that have reviewed at the same level. And if we have a geographic area that has not received a grant recently, and they've reviewed very similar to another grant, we might take the geographic area into consideration, but it's not a specific part of our rubric. So we will do libraries in the same area. What we will not do is provide multiple grants for the same project. So if an academic library and a public library are collaborating, they get one grant for the project. So it's up to them who applies.
Thank you.
Okay. So digital inclusion, this is one where, like literacy, people can have kind of a narrow viewpoint of it. Is it hotspots? Is it laptop blending? And those are very important topics. You can also do a broader scope with these as well, though. Our focus is to increase or improve digital access for users with limited access or knowledge of devices or online resources. So it can be assistive devices for people who have disabilities. We've had 3 or 4 grants that have done very well with that. It can be technology training programs. There's a little bit of overlap there with digital literacy. For example, if you want to do a significant digital literacy program, and perhaps that includes having people have a device to use through a series of classes, you could purchase devices for that digital literacy class. So the digital inclusion and digital literacy kind of overlap a little. If you have an idea that is not in these examples, that does not exclude it. These were like, what 3 or 4 things can I list in the presentation and in the documentation to give people some ideas? So if you have ideas that don't match this and you're concerned about it, again, you're welcome to reach out to me. But the basic scope of this one is, how can you improve your community in a way that helps those who have limited access? We're less likely to review, a grant that would provide further digital materials for a community population that already has significant access. So don't look at this as a priority that can help increase an ebook or a digital collection without a significant outreach to an underserved population. The special collections priority, we're interested in projects that engage a local community in the collection and documentation or preservation of their local histories. One of the things to consider with the special collections priority is 12 months and $25,000 is not a lot of money. It sounds like a lot if you're looking to start a program, but I would say our more successful digitization projects have been narrow in scope. So don't look at this as we want to digitize our local history collection. That's far beyond the scope of 1 year and $25,000. But if you look at your collection, for example, there's some Wayne State University members on the webinar today. They did receive a grant in the past that dealt with oral histories of Arab American auto workers. That's a nice Michigan-related, community-related topic. It's an important historical subject, and it was a tight enough focus that they could do it in a year. So think about how the collection you may want to digitize and provide publicly focuses on your local community and how you can include it in the Digital Public Library of America. So beware, we're going to be very strict on copyright for this because we are requiring it to be provided publicly outside of your library facility. Any questions on the special collections priority? Biz will go into this in far more detail. No? Okay, I'll keep going. So a little bit more on the digitization. Like I said, be aware there are expectations in that digitization packet. You must address them all. It's not an either or. The questions that relate to digitization standards, you need to address them all for your proposal to be reviewed well. If, as somebody had commented when we were doing introductions, this isn't an expertise at your staff, you are allowed in the budget to budget time and funding for consultants and service providers. So you can hire someone with the expertise. Biz may have advice on possible people to hire for that. So if your staff don't have time, don't have the expertise, it doesn't necessarily mean you cannot do that. The application webinar for the local history and special collections priority is going to be 3 p.m. on April 11th, by the way. There's also a focus in the grant documentation. There are the 3 priorities that the Library of Michigan is interested in, but we also want you to include the focus from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Since that's the legislation we are provided the funding under, and they are who we report back. One of IMLS's strong focuses out of their authorizing legislation is services that target populations that are underserved. You can think of this as this legislation was originally written in the 1990s. This is the 1990s version of DEI. So individuals with disability, individuals with limited functional literacy, limited English proficiency, limited information literacy skills, people from diverse geographic backgrounds, diverse cultural backgrounds, and diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. These are things that are important to the Institute of Museum and Library Services and to the library world in general. So if you can bring these into your proposal, that will review well. I do get questions sometimes about, am I supposed to restrict my program to someone from a particular group? And my answer to that is no, but you do need to make sure a group that you are reaching out to is aware of that you don't, that your outreach isn't general outreach like we've posted on Facebook. Well, what about homeless communities that may not be able to follow the library on Facebook? Have you reached out to them if it's a digital inclusion project that might be helpful to them? So we in no way expect you to turn anyone away, but we do expect you to promote this as much as possible to users who have limited abilities to use the collection or program that you're proposing. So we do want you, as the title of the grant says, to improve access to information for a community. What that community is depends on your area, your library mission, your library type. What we don't want to do is purchase a collection for you and then you're using it with your current population, if that makes sense. And I do see Isabella posted a question. Can funds be used for teachers to teach technology training programs? I'm going to say it would depend. If the focus is to support something that happens wholly within a K-12 school, I'm going to say no. That would be using the grant money that's intended for public libraries to support school curriculum. But it's not to say you can't use a school as a partner.
I think it's
So,
sorry, it's because I don't really have staff here that can teach some things, and we've had requests for different um, computer and technology training courses, and
mhm.
we just don't have anyone who can do that
Oh,
at a public library. So if I
so
was
that
going to offer classes to people who want to learn different things, can I use the money to pay people to come in and lead the
absolutely.
program?
You can use the services section of the budget to hire trainers if you'd like. That would be perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Hey, Karen, sorry, I have a question too.
Mhm.
Could the funds be used to improve the accessibility of a digital collection that already exists online? So I'm
Yes.
thinking about, like, we have a lot of oral histories that don't have transcripts. So could the funds be used to
Mhm.
do the
Absolutely.
transcription? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Eastern Michigan's archives right now has a grant from us, and they are doing transcriptions of a script diary from the mid 19th century that has been digitized, but I've actually was allowed to flip through one of the books. It was very cool. Um, but that's not something that you can do OCR on, so they're going through and hand transcribing it very painstakingly as part of a grant with us. So absolutely. It's
Great,
actually
thank
very
you.
interesting if anybody wants to go visit EMU. The lady who wrote the diaries that they're transcribing, um, she had a very early camera, so she inserted pictures of her children that she did with the camera. When she sewed clothes for the kids, she inserted pieces of the fabric she used. It's very much a three-dimensional, very interesting look at 19th century life in Ypsilanti. It's very cool. Any other questions on the focus for particular underserved groups? Okay. So as a heads up, we will not fund things that are considered standard library operations. So if your request does not have that outreach or informational or programming component to an underserved population, if you ask for basic collection development, automation, staffing, or equipment replacement, that's not going to be granted. And we're not going to fund automation at all at this point. That is considered standard library costs. We do know there are libraries in the state that are not automated. We frankly wish we had another alternative for you guys. But unfortunately, that's not this grant. Also, requests for upgrades, collections, or equipment that are new to your organization, but that are not integral to the grant activities, the outreach to the population, will be considered standard library operations and will not be granted. So the things that you ask to buy have to support the outreach to or programming to the group you have identified. Does anybody have questions on that? It can be a little bit hair splitting. Under some circumstances, you can buy the equipment. Under some circumstances, you can't. It depends on how you're promoting it to the population. Okay, Jack is asking about a proposal for accessibility to individuals with limited eyesight, limited visual capacities. That's something that you could do, but it would have to be with a strong outreach component to those members of your community. Okay. So some basics for the grant and the timeline. It is 1 year. The grant activities are October to September, which matches our fiscal year. The minimum you can ask for is $5,000. The maximum is $25,000. Funds are dispersed on a reimbursement basis only. I do require reimbursement requests to be at least quarterly. I didn't do that when we first started the grant programs, and I discovered at the end of the year, it's really hard to sort out all of your receipts and documentation. So we do it quarterly. It requires you to submit more often, but it ends up being less work because the documentation is fresh. I'm going to say this right now in terms of indirect costs. If your request does not hit $25,000 in the overall budget, I would add indirect costs. There's no reason not to. You don't need to do anything to document them unless you're an academic, and that is just providing your indirect cost rate. The application availability is January. That's already up. We're doing our grant writing webinars now. The application due date is May 31st by 5 p.m. That is a firm deadline. If you submit afterwards, or if your application is not complete, you will not be considered. We do proposal review in June and July. In June, basically, I go through my eligibility rubric. Are you a public library? Are you an academic library? And I set up my peer review group meetings. In July, the peer reviewers get your proposals, they read through them, and we have a meeting to discuss which ones we will select. If anybody's interested in being a peer reviewer, let me know. We announce the grants and do grant contracts in August and September. We do a grant administration training in September. That is absolutely required. If no one from your library shows up, your contract will be revoked. And then your contract, we call it, your grant award is executed, which sounds really odd if you haven't heard that term before. What it means is your grant starts on October 1st, and your grant expenditures can begin on October 1st. If you have purchased something before October 1st, I cannot reimburse you. So if you're concerned about when you can order it, you can stack it up in your cart, but you can't click order until October 1st. You're also required to do quarterly reports. They can be fairly brief, but I like a half page or so, where you just give me an update on how things are going. And that way, if there's something that looks like it's a problem to me, I know about it ahead of time. And I can reach out to you and help you with whatever the issue is. These are not in any way punitive. The Library of Michigan is never interested in, can we cut you off? What we're interested in is, how are things going? And if we see something that might be a problem, reaching out to you and making sure that things can continue to go well, that we can help you iron out any problems. Our goal is for you to have a successful project and for you to be able to spend absolutely every penny, because I don't have time to reallocate it to something else. So those quarterly reports and reimbursements are due the last business day of December, March, June, and September. With the exception of that last reimbursement request, that's actually going to be due the end of August. You can revise your project. The last day you can do that is the end of April, because that's halfway through the year. You can do minor revisions pretty much anytime. I'm very easy about that. You send me an email, I email you back and say, this change in grant activities is approved. If you need to do something that's really going to change the focus of your grant, it really didn't work with the community group that you were trying to work with. You were doing a digitization project and your contract with a vendor fell through, and you need to significantly restructure your proposal, that would be a formal project revision. You need to complete your expenditures by the end of August. And your final reimbursement request, I have the last business day of September in here. I'm frankly may have to back that up to mid-August. Office of Financial Management in the Department of Education says when we have to close our books. And last year they asked us to close our books in September, which we found very frightening. So you will know that at the time of contracts, but that may be 2 weeks earlier. In your final report, this should be fairly significant. This should be anywhere from 5 to 10 pages. It's going to include your evaluation results. It's going to include your statistics. That's due the last business day of October. So if that sounds like something that you're willing to take on, the application is now open. Michigan.gov/LSTA is the grant page. You guys signed up for the webinar, so you clearly found that. Just as a heads up, what you're required to do to apply is complete the online application. If you have a formal partner who's going to do grant activities with you, they need to have a partner statement, and you will upload that into the grant application. You're required to turn in the SIPA and the board assurance statements. Whether you are an academic or public, you both must submit both of them. They must be completely signed. They must be dated. That is the second thing that will get your grant excluded from consideration, is if you do not have a correctly and completely signed SIPA and board assurances document attached to the grant. Sometimes I have people who are like, well, I'll just sign in all 4 slots, because the board assurances is the director, the grant administrator, your authorized official, who's not necessarily the director or dean, and your fiscal agent. So make sure you're having the right people sign the right lines. If more than one, if the same person has more than one of those roles, they need to sign for each role they hold, not sign one and leave the rest blank. So it sounds like I'm nattering on that particular thing a lot, because someone submits almost every year without it being complete, and it just breaks my heart. So beware of that. You can reopen an attachment you have uploaded into the application to confirm you uploaded the version you wanted to. I highly recommend you do that, especially with the board assurances. You're required to submit your budget spreadsheet. Your budget information for the grant is going to be in a separate spreadsheet that is on the website, and you then add that to the online application. And if you're doing digitization, you need to submit a copyright assessment form. And in that form, you're going to say, these are the materials that we're looking to digitize and what your assessment is for copyright status. Either it is not required, or what level is required. We have had people submit something that just says at the top, we own the items, and they did not list the individual items they wanted to digitize. That will not be accepted. So beware, we really do want you to fill that form out. So any questions on those items? Nobody, gotcha. So the last little bit, all the signatures must be original on your certifications and assurances. They must all be dated. Everything must be filled out. One of the reasons for this is we don't circulate contracts afterwards. You will get a grant award notice signed by the superintendent of education if your grant is approved. This signature sheet is your signatures for the contract. You have already submitted them when you submit the application. So that's one of the reasons we're picky about it. So the application review process, just for you to know, they are scored by members of our LSTA Advisory Council, who are a group of librarians around the state from different geographic areas in different library sizes and types. Not all of them participate, but usually about half the Advisory Council does, and peer reviewers who are volunteer reviewers. The proposal reviews done by the peer reviewers and the advisory council carry a lot of weight with the Library of Michigan staff. I do the eligibility rubric, but after that, I leave it in the hands of the peer reviewers and the advisory council. I have not worked a public reference desk at this point in many years, so I rely on my peer reviewers to be the people to tell me this is standard library practice. This is a well thought out program. So when you're writing, do consider your writing to your peers. And if you're not sure you want to apply this year, but you want to see what it's like to have a grant reviewed, you're welcome to volunteer. The proposals are also scored by LM staff, but we heavily weight the peer reviewers' view. The state librarian, Randy Riley, makes the final decisions, and then we turn around and take those decisions and send them up our chain of command to the state superintendent of education for approval. So some final reminders. We can't take a late one. We can't take an unsigned SIPA form. We can't take an unsigned board assurances form. You must have a UEI number from sam.gov. It doesn't have to be an active account, but you must have the number, and you must include the required attachments. So I see Jack has asked, is requesting less than 25,000, such as 10, help you award more grants? Practically, yes. But in terms of reviewing your proposal, I am going to say, ask for the money you need to do your project well. We are more likely to review that well. Library staff tend to go, you know, how can I get this done on as small a budget as I can so I can get this past, you know, our board of trustees or the dean. We can't give you more than $25,000, but we want you to have enough money to be able to complete the project the way it's intended. So if you need to ask for $20,000 or $25,000 to do that, that's what we would expect to see in your budget, if that makes sense. Okay, I have a thank you there. Yay. So I'm going to stop presenting. Oh, Jay, you have a question?
I was just asking in terms of, you know, the library is the lead applicant, the fiduciary of the grant, right?
Correct.
Responsible party. They may have a partner though. In terms of reaching out to you prior to the application deadline to ask questions, do you require you know, if the partner is in the has more of the availability to set up that pre-meeting to ask questions. Is that okay, or does the library have to be at that meeting as well? Does that make sense?
The administrative meeting?
Yeah, just
who?
the reaching out to you and talking through the project.
You can both contact me. That would be fine. I will warn you that the library cannot be acting as a fiscal agent for someone else who's doing the majority of the grant. So you may want to talk to me about how you're divvying up duties with your idea.
Got it. Okay.
Just so
Okay.
that you don't submit something where we're going to go, no. Talk to me about it first, and I'm happy to chat with you.
Okay. Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
So this is the grants page. So you would go to michigan.gov/LSTA. You would select the Improving Access to Information Grant link towards the bottom of the page. And then here is the link to our current grantees, descriptions of their projects. That might be useful if you're kind of feeling out what you might want to do. I explain the priorities, the basic guidelines that we just talked through. And then here, you guys have clearly registered for this one, but you can register for the rest if you want the recordings or if you want to attend in person. There is a little bit of a note here. There is a ban for using federal funds from on equipment from certain companies. This is primarily some Chinese tech companies, but do be aware, I'm not going to double check this. An auditor might. So if you buy networking equipment as part of the grant, you buy hotspots as part of the grant, you know, if you're buying it from Lenovo, something like that, you're probably fine. If you get a cheaper rate from a company name that you don't recognize, you might want to double check them in sam.gov. Their record will show up as excluded. So this is what I really want to show you here. These are all the forms and documents. This is the application packet. If you're going to do the literacy or digital inclusion priorities, it has everything you need to know, including the question by question to apply. This is the local history and special collections priority. We've got the timeline. Here are the admin manuals. This is the current one with some slight tweaks. This is next year's program. And then we have application forms. This is the SIPA form and the certification assurances form that you need to fill out and upload in your application. There is a budget worksheet This is where you're going to do your budget. You're going to include in one of the columns a narrative description of how you came up with the costs. And then there is a column for putting the costs in. When you do that form, I'm not going to open it up because it will make a mess. The state network won't open up spreadsheets very well. But it is a spreadsheet. You're going to type into anything that's gray. The rest of it is either not a cell you can use or it will calculate for you automatically. If you're going to do digitization versus transcription or something like that, here's the rights assessment template. And then it shifts to active grant forms. These are forms that you may need to use to submit documentation to me for reimbursement or for your quarterly reports. So everything you need to submit something to me or to get the information you need about how to apply or how to manage your grant is in this list of forms and documents. To actually start the application, you come down to this section. This link opens an application for literacy and digital inclusion. This link opens an application for local history or special collections. Each time you click on that, it opens a new application. So if you have started an application and saved it, when you come back to it, you want to use this third link, return to an application or submit a reimbursement request or report. And you will have set up a username and password. When you started your initial application, you will use that to log back in, and then you can reopen any current forms you have if you're a current grantee, any current and the current applications that you may be working on. If you submit anything in the system, an application, a form to me, you will get an automated email from the system that says it was submitted. So if you don't get that email, double check with me and make sure it came through. I will confirm receipt of applications and confirm that your documentation was attached correctly if you submit by noon on Wednesday before the applications are due. Even if you are submitting later than that, if you just want to make sure that it showed up before 5 o'clock on the deadline, you can also contact me. I will be available that day. And then if you go a little further down, I had mentioned the extra documentation, how to credit IMLS, the information about outcome-based evaluations, indirect costs, etc. Those are all right there. Some of these are also in appendices in the grant administration manual. So I will stop share. If you don't have any further questions, hopefully I can talk with you about the very specifics of the application in the next webinar. If you're doing the digitization webinar, I recommend you do mine and Biz's. You can watch the recording. That will be just fine. And I encourage you to reach out to me and to reach out to Biz if you're doing digitization to talk to us about the proposal. One thing I really don't want you to do is spend a lot of time on the proposal without talking to us and perhaps have missed something that we would be looking for. So don't at all feel like you shouldn't reach out to us before you submit. Please do. If you give me a copy of your proposal, I'm going to say perhaps up to a week before the deadline, I will look through it and offer comments and return it to you. So we're very serious that we hope you will reach out and talk to us about it. And hopefully we can fund as many grants as we can. So have a good afternoon, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I hope to hear from you soon.